Dave Brown sat in his living room in a chair. Across from his chair was an empty couch. Between his chair and the couch was a coffee table with 3 glasses of champagne, 1 full, 2 empty. Next to the table was a bottle of the drink in an ice bucket. Anyone watching him as he relaxed at 7:02 p.m. was a little concerned when he spoke clearly. "That's right. I can hear her car in the driveway." But there were no observers. Dave was alone in the room. He continued to sit with a relaxed look when the front door opened. He couldn't be seen from where he was sitting, but he immediately heard his wife's voice. "Where are you, Dave?" "In the living room, Deb." Dave stood up abruptly as his wife entered the archway. She was holding the hand of a man about 5 years younger than her 49 years. He was thin, medium height, wearing a business suit. In her other hand, she held an orange A4 envelope. Dave, this is Michael." "Michael, this is my husband, Dave." Noticing that she averted her eyes and was generally nervous, Dave took 3 steps and warmly shook the uninvited guest's hand. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Michael. Do you mind if I call you Mike?" "Not at all, sir." "May I offer you a glass of champagne?" "Please, have a seat." Dave watched as the 2 very embarrassed men sat down on the sofa and took the offered glasses after he had filled them. "Cheers. Now, would you mind telling this simple soul what's going on?" Deborah and Mike looked over at each other. Mike nodded faintly and squeezed her hand. Dave, it's not really nice to talk about it, so I'll just tell you straight. Michael and I have fallen in love with each other. I'd like a divorce so we can get married." She paused, waiting for her husband's anger. She looked up from the floor to see the look on Dave's face. This was going to be awful. She just knew it. She hadn't expected his face to remain neutral. Unconsciously, she pulled herself a little closer to Mike. "Okay, Deb, are those the divorce papers?" Deb looked up stunned again. She had rehearsed this scene in her head many times, but never, not even in her wildest dreams, had it been like this. She looked at Mike and tried to convey with a look, "I don't know what to say." He took the envelope from Deb and placed it on the table. "Yes, Dave, that's right. I think you'll find them very reasonable. Deb isn't asking you for anything but her car. In the package is her disclaimer of this house, your car, all of your joint assets, and your retirement fund. It's all signed and notarized on our end. I should warn you that I'm a lawyer, so it's okay. But feel free to hire your own representative to put your mind at ease. Well, I must say, you're both very generous." Deb looked very flustered, like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. "It was Mike's idea, Dave. In fact, he insisted. He said it was bad enough that he was stealing his wife without taking your hard-earned assets. That was in no way my motivation, but Mike is pretty rich. Even without your money, we'll have more than you and I ever had. Maybe things would have been different if you had gotten a job after the kids were older and helped with the finances, Deb." Deb lowered her eyes again. "So, Mike, is your wife going to give a speech like this, or has she already gotten it?" "No. My wife died 8 years ago. I'm a widower." "I'm sorry to hear that, actually. Thanks, Dave. It hurt like hell for a year or so. But time heals all wounds, as they say. Look, I'm really sorry about this, but I met Deb, and she was like the missing half of my soul. I didn't think I'd ever be whole again. I wanted to tell you that I've been in love with your wife for months." "It's okay, Mike. I never hold a grudge. Please marry her with my blessing." Mike and Deb exchanged stunned looks. Deb because it was not at all what she expected. Then she felt a huge sense of relief. A few months ago, she had led Michael to believe that her marriage to Dave had collapsed, that they were trying to save it, but there was little hope. She knew that the weak point in her plan was Dave's reaction, which might make Mike realize that wasn't quite true. That's why she begged Mike to do it without confrontation. Mike insisted that real men solved problems face to face. He didn't budge. Mike was stunned because even after Deb told him that her marriage was on its last legs, he expected a more angry reaction. From Deb's descriptions, he had formed a mental image of Dave. From what she had said, He was a large, uneducated man used to solving problems with his fists. Mike hesitated at the idea of taking a bodyguard with him tonight, but finally dismissed the thought. In the back of his mind, he thought that if the offended husband hit him a little, it might ease his own conscience. His own sense of propriety was weighing on him. "So, Deb, I assume you met Mike at one of your girls' parties?" Deb nodded at the coffee table. "One of the girls' parties that you assured me were completely harmless and didn't threaten our marriage when I asked." This time Deb nodded at the floor. "I guess that's a lesson for you, Mikey boy." Mikey glanced at Deb. Deb's gaze moved to a section of the floor a little farther away from Mike. "So what happens to people now? Come on, Deb, you've got to have a plan. You're giving me the house, so I assume you were going to pack up your stuff and move in with him. I won't get in your way." "I was going to do it tomorrow while you're at work. They'll have the locks changed by tomorrow. I'm sure your lawyer friend will agree it's a wise move on my part. It's easier if you do it now, isn't it?" Deb and Mike got up to go upstairs. "How about we have a talk, Mike? Deb can start packing. Come on, Mike, let's have a chat. I think you owe me at least that much." Deb was torn between wanting to avoid this really uncomfortable situation and having to witness everything that was said. In the end, Mike made the decision for her, sitting back down. "Go on, Deb. I promise not to hurt him. I just want to have a chat. Until we're divorced, I'll feel responsible for your safety. I just want to make sure he's taking your best interests to heart. Besides, you made the decision to leave me. I don't see the point in trying to talk you out of it. Our marriage is obviously dead." Both men watched her walk up the stairs and disappear. "I have to say, you're being very sensible, Dave." "It's all right, Mike. Between you and me, it's been about a year since I've felt Deb's love. I guess that's when you two met. That will be a relief indeed. I have no desire to condemn us both to a loveless marriage." "Still, that's very nice of you, Dave." "You're welcome, Mike. Now, as a lawyer, you know that whenever you sell a car or a house, you are legally obligated to point out any known defects to the new owners." Mike laughed. "Well, slavery is dead, and I don't think Deb would like being considered property that needs a transfer of ownership, but I know what you mean, Dave." Dave smiled, too. He guessed correctly that Mike was a smart and decent man. "Okay, now please believe that what I'm about to tell you is not dictated by malice. I just want to point out some of Deb's flaws that may not be obvious after a year of knowing her. Besides, her future happiness is important to me. After all, I've been in love with her for 27 years. I'd also like to share everything I've tried to do to make her happy but obviously failed. That way, you'll know not to waste your time doing the same thing." Mike nodded. He knew that what was about to happen probably wouldn't be entirely altruistic in its intent, but he felt compelled to listen to this innocent man. "Right. I assumed Deb was back on the pill?" Mike nodded again, feeling a little awkward. It was tantamount to admitting that he'd slept with this guy's wife. "Yeah, she's on the pill. I had no idea she ever stopped." "She was on the pill when we met, but about 12 months after we got married, she went off them. She said they suppressed her sexual appetite. It's been condoms for me ever since. I hate those damn things. They take away all the spontaneity, and I don't know about you, but I try my best to do without them." "Yeah, I know what you mean, Dave." Then, when we decided to stop at 2 kids, she started using condoms as an excuse to not make love as often. I begged her to go back on the pill, but she refused, saying she didn't want to swallow artificial chemicals every day. Since then, our lovemaking has dwindled from several times a week to a few times a month, then to 0 about a year ago. Mike didn't answer anything. He knew that Deb was very careful about what food she ate and opted for chemical-free options whenever possible. Sex with her was still exciting and happened at least 3 times a week, even with the restrictions on their encounters. "I know this is very ungentlemanly, Mike, but does she swallow your—" "Well, you know." Mike found this question very uncomfortable. People of his class didn't talk about such things. He involuntarily averted his eyes. "I understand. Yeah. I remember what she was like when Deb and I were dating. Now, please remember that I'm not saying all this with malice aforethought. If I was selling a car that I knew would have to throw a tire out 6 months after I got rid of it, I would have warned you about that too. Deb hasn't swallowed for me since we got married. In fact, I don't think I had a blowjob until about 18 months after we were married, and the doggy style stopped shortly thereafter. We stopped having sex completely until recently. I just got tired of getting knockdowns and stopped asking. Maybe you'd like to write in your journal to keep track of any sudden downfalls every month or so. Dave paused so Mike could add something, but he didn't take the opportunity. Here's another thing I didn't notice until a couple years after we were married. I looked around one day and suddenly realized that almost everything I owned before Deb was gone. The bed, the clothes, the couch, and pictures of old girlfriends, although to be honest, I found them in the attic. I don't know if all women do this, or if it's just Deb, but it was like she wanted to clear the nest of previous female influences. Again, Dave paused, and again Mike was silent. He thought about his new bed and the sheets. Then he remembered his conversation with Deb a week ago about the portrait of his first wife, the woman he had loved tenderly until circumstances cut her out of his life. I hope you're a better judge of her lies than I am, Mike. Just 3 weeks ago, I asked her if she still loved me and if we were good. She looked me straight in the eye and said yes. She did the same thing she always does, looked me in the eye until I broke eye contact. I can't believe it only took 3 weeks to fall so much in love. Mike staggered slightly at the suddenness of this conversation and all the information Dave was trying to get him to internalize. Something about those last 2 sentences was disturbing, but he didn't have time to determine the source. So he focused on the only aspect he could absorb. Don't worry, Dave, I'm a lawyer. I've spent 20 years learning how to recognize liars. They always give themselves away. All right. Chuckles. Again, just some advice that you may or may not take. Watch to see if she takes her rings off when she goes to visit her sister. You may want to check her underwear drawer. I suggest you don't trust her blindly like I did. I thought she was completely incapable of deception, but I'm obviously a dumbass. What else can I say? Oh yeah, if she's true to form, she'll probably stop going to the gym in about 12 months and gain a little weight. At this point, Dave stood up, grabbed a photo album off the shelf, and started flipping through the pages. Here are a couple pictures from 2 years ago when she started going to bachelorette parties. As you can see, her face and ass are plump. But after 2 kids, who would be surprised by that? Mike turned a few pages and saw a chubbier version of his fiancée with far less makeup than he'd ever seen. He was a little stunned at the difference that a little makeup made. He continued flipping through the pages. Is that Deb's mother? I see a strong resemblance. Yes, it is. Wait a minute. As you can see, she was a beautiful woman. That's her when she was in her early 50s. She was a very spectacular woman. Dave picked up another album and opened it to a page. He waited for Mike to state the obvious. Jesus, how old is she here? About 55. She was one of those women who, once they hit menopause around 52 or 53, lost their looks quickly. She took it very gracefully, though, simply saying that she thanked God for the outer beauty she had been blessed with for so long. Dave watched as Mike alternately looked at the 2 pictures. Now, I promise to tell you about all my mistakes that caused her to fail to love me. I suggest you try a different approach. Mine was clearly unsuccessful. Dave paused to pour the champagne. About 25 years ago, she wanted a wedding. I tried to object, saying we'd be better off investing in a house, but she said that if I had faith that we'd be together forever, I wouldn't save money for such an important day for her. If you want, I can find a copy of our wedding vows for you. From memory, we hold to the traditional love, honor, obedience, and rejection of all others. If you try something different, you might do better than me. Not really important to you, but don't bother working your fingers to the bone and doing a bunch of shit overtime so she can get the flash house she's always wanted. It clearly wasn't holding her legs together. In fact, we're probably here because I refused to pay for the facelift she wanted, preferring to invest in our retirement. She can be pretty persistent when her heart is set on something. You've probably noticed. Mike nodded, wondering if this characteristic of Deb's was really the wonderful quality he'd thought it was until now. So, I thought in vain that I was being smart by asking her out every month to discuss anything about me or our relationship that was starting to irritate or cause the slightest resentment. Our last date was less than a month ago and she didn't say anything. A man of your caliber, I'm sure he could come up with something better. At that moment, Mike noticed the light in Dave's eyes and suddenly realized what he was up to. Nevertheless, he made some good points. The idea that Deb was completely free of guile was very much at odds with some of his own thoughts lately. He was so taken aback by Dave's obvious amusement at the whole scenario that he ignored his internal alarm again. Dave kept talking, even though they were both obviously aware that Deb had stopped coming down the stairs, being within earshot. Keep an eye out for lists of things she's going to remove from the house. That's a good hint that she's already treating the marriage with contempt and is looking for a replacement. It won't change much of what happens, but it will allow you to prepare for the endgame she has planned and encourage you to start digging for other evidence. Mike blinked and looked around. For the first time, he saw 3 champagne glasses and a bucket of ice. Clear evidence that all 3 people present knew about tonight's meeting in advance, when it should have been just the 2 of them. His usual, very observant nature missed the clues. Dave watched Mike's eyes run. Yeah, I knew it was going to be today. Deb called me twice today to make sure I'd be home by 7. Mike tore his gaze away from Dave and looked over to where Deb was halfway down the stairs. Deb resumed her descent, clearly pretending not to have heard the last few minutes of the conversation. Dave, do you want to talk about which of the family photos I can take now or some other time? Dave ignored her and leaned across the couch from her, keeping his eyes on his rival. The last thing I did wrong was forgive Deb when I first caught her cheating on our marriage. What? Asked Mike. No, came out of Deborah's lips as she retreated into the kitchen. Yes, it was right after our second child was born. I forgave her because she and our counselor convinced me it was an isolated mistake caused by postpartum depression. I often wondered if I had been too soft on her. Maybe a harder line at the time could have prevented a recurrence. I justified my actions by saying that I was acting in the best interest of the children. They grew up to be good people, so hopefully I did the right thing by them. For her sake, I hope you'll be generous enough to forgive her when your time comes. I don't know what to say, Dave. You don't have to say anything, Mike. Just answer me. Look into your heart and ask yourself if you would forgive your late wife if you found her sleeping with someone in your own bed. For the first time, Mike lost his composure. He leaned forward. Out of the corner of his eye, Dave noticed some movement and saw a pale-faced Deborah standing in the kitchen doorway. My wife would never disrespect me like that. We loved each other, too. Wait a minute. You said, the first time Deb cheated on me, were there other times? No, just 2 times. Then and now. Deb jumped out of the kitchen. No, she screamed desperately. I'm done packing, Mike. If you take my suitcases, we can get out of here right now. Calm down, Deborah. The last was said in a quiet but unrelenting voice. Surprisingly, the voice was Mike's. Deb stopped like a dumbfounded woman. Mike turned to Dave again. Deborah assured me that she wasn't cheating because you had an open marriage, Dave. Did she look you in the eye when she said that, Mike? Mike looked at Dave, then at a shrinking Deb, then back at Dave. Dave saw in Mike's eyes the sudden realization that he wasn't as good at recognizing liars as he thought he was. What did she tell you about the state of our marriage, Mike? She said it had been shaky for a few years, Dave. That you'd been seeing a counselor for a while, but there was no hope for either of you. Dave didn't say anything back, just stared at Mike as he continued talking to fill the void. Now, I guess that doesn't really fit with what you said about still going on dates and asking if she loved you. Dave continued to look Mike in the eye again. He chose the exact moment when Mike realized he was being played like a complete sucker. An expression easily interpreted as self-disgust flashed across the little man's face. Mike turned to the frozen Deborah. "You goddamn bitch. You've turned me into the man I despise the most. A man who has other men's wives without their husbands knowing." Upon hearing that statement, Deb dropped to her knees. Mike was suddenly speechless and interested in the same area of the carpet that had so fascinated Deb earlier. Finally, he pulled himself together and looked at Dave again. "Please, Dave, you have to believe me. I had no idea." "Don't worry, Mike. I told you she was a good liar. God, I wish she'd told me we had an open marriage. Then I might have slept with her last year." The deliberate use of humor in a very tense situation seemed to work. Mike relaxed a little, but remained silent. "Did that mean the engagement was off?" Yes, definitely. In that case, I want you to meet a couple people. John, Alice." At that moment, the door to the basement opened. Hearing a noise, Mike turned around and saw a young man and woman approaching. "Mike, I want you to meet my son John and my daughter Alice." They were listening to our conversation through a microphone. John graduated from law school 2 years ago, and Alice earned her degree this year. John and Alice shook a confused Mike's hand. John then picked up an envelope from the table and began to nonchalantly examine its contents. Dave turned to his daughter. "Do you believe me now, Alice?" "Yes, Dad. There's no doubt she's a cold, conniving schemer." All eyes turned to the moaning. Deb was still on her knees, but now her head was on the floor. Sensing the silence, she lifted her head and was met with 4 accusing stares. She jumped up and ran out the front door. No one made the slightest attempt to stop or follow her. John calmly finished going through the contents of the envelope. "Everything seems to be in order, Dad." "Good, thank you. Now, who wants a beer?" I think I should go." "You stay here, little Mikey. There's still some things we need to figure out." "Like what?" "Well, I can forgive you for sleeping with that stupid bitch. Like she's got an open marriage and all. But I have to decide whether to rip your head off and spit in your neck for trying to steal her." Mike looked at the other man, noting that the other man was a head taller and much larger. Then he looked into his eyes and saw a familiar glint. Dave decided to calm down a bit. "John is doing what you do, Mike." By now, Mike was no longer surprised that Dave knew so much about him. "How's your current job, John?" "The hours are crap and the pay sucks." "Don't you want to come and work with me?" "Hell yeah." Dave smiled. "Then that leaves the issue of supporting my ex-wife until she gets a job. She doesn't have a house or money anymore." With a growing sense of relief, Mike entered the new topic. "I'm really sorry, Dave. As soon as she lied to me, she broke the implied contract we had. In the event of a breach of contract, ownership passes to the previous title holder." "Yeah, but morally? Don't talk to me about morality. I'm a lawyer." "John, do you have a dictionary?" "I'm a little vague on what it actually means." Everyone laughed. "No, seriously, Mike. I think you should look after her until she gets back on her feet. If you play your cards right, you can pretend you're thinking about keeping her and cheer yourself up in bed for a while." No, I can't do that. But I'll make sure she's okay. Not for her, for you. I admire craftsmanship wherever I see it, and tonight I was totally outclassed, wasn't I? Have you ever considered a career in law, Dave? The way you took me off balance, passing off negatives as positives and not giving me time to think, was worthy of the best prosecutor I've ever seen." Dave smiled modestly but didn't say anything back. He loved his job and the people who surrounded him at work. "So, 4 beers, then." For the first time ever, Dave looked away, until he was sure that the tears that had accumulated in the corners of his eyes were gone. He would not make eye contact again. By this time, Deborah Brown was already 700 meters away, walking fast and accelerating as if her heels were toast.